So,
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
We got to get the Zoom on.
Yes. Yes, sir, we are live recording. Recording on Zoom.
I have a 7:01. Welcome to the Van Buren Township Board of Zoning Appeals meeting, and if you would please rise for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, thank you for coming out this beautiful evening. Will our secretary please call the order?
John Herman,
Here.
Amos Grissett,
Here.
trustee Kevin Martin,
Here.
John Haas,
Present.
Aaron Sellers,
Present.
Jeffrey Jar,
Present.
Carl Larock,
Here.
We have a full quorum. Amazing. All right, the next item on the agenda, acceptance of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions or corrections, motion is in order to approve the agenda as presented.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agenda as written.
Support. Mr. Haas. Any discussions? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye, opposed likewise, the motion carried. Next item under, on the agenda, there's no public hearing. So we'll go right to unfinished business. The case number 22-056 from the Belleville Yacht Club.
can we do approval of the minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please.
I don't see it on the agenda. Okay, all right, I'm sorry. Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
You have in front of you copies of the minutes. So if there's no corrections or if there's discussion, feel free to start off with either motion or comments.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Jar.
I move to approve the minutes as submitted for April 11th, 2023.
Motion by Haas, seconded by Agus Grimm. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed likewise, that motion carried. All right, now we're going to the unfinished business, item number 1. The location is on the lakefront property adjacent to 831 East Huron River Drive, and the parcel number is listed, Zone Belleville Lake Shoreline District B, non-single family residential, which is also known as BLB. Adjacent property at 831 East Huron Drive is zoned as R1C, single family residential district. The request is for an exception, modification, or appeal by the Belleville Area Job Club to install 2 docks, structures with each length not to exceed 85.3 feet, as revised from the previous request with the proposed lengths not to exceed 120 feet. Subject to approval by the state of Michigan, in contrast to the requirements of section 3.120D, in quotation mark 5 of Van Buren zoning ordinance, which limit docks length to 40 feet into Belleville Lake, measured perpendicularly from the shoreline, unless greater length is necessary to reach the water depth of 3 feet. The subject site is Township Lake property adjacent to 831 East Huron River Drive, and the parcel number is again listed in the record, on the north side, east of Huron River Drive between Loza Lane and Evelyn Court. The site is zoned Belleville Lake Shore District B, non-single family residential. The request will be reviewed by the BZA per requirements of section 3.120 F7 of the Buren Township zoning ordinance. And with that, we'll go to the presentation from the staff, township staff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm making a minor adjustment to my slides to get those back on the screen before you. I don't have many slides, and I know I've spoken about this case at length, so I don't plan to spend too long speaking about it again tonight. But I did just want to have some information available to you on the slides. Let's see if this works. Okay, thank you, members of the board. Thank you, members of the public who are able to attend tonight's meeting and the applicant. My report presents background information about the scope and the nature of the request and some information about the site. Some information about the specific request of the BZA, which the chair summarized is to review a request for an exception from one of the regulations in the Bevel Lake Shoreline District's zoning ordinance, section 3.120 of our township zoning ordinance. My report also goes into detail about some of the findings that BZA may use to make their decision tonight. And there's some minor additions to the packet for tonight, which I'll go over in the slides following. Again, the request is to complete the construction of 2 dock structures, each of which have a length not to exceed 85.3 feet, which is reduced from a previous application that showed dock structures with lengths not to exceed 120. Those dock structures are shown on the site plan on the screen. Along with this site plan, there are other graphics that were submitted by the applicant to assist with their request for tonight's meeting. To recap some of the process to date, this exception request ties into a request for the applicant to complete the construction of what is considered what is defined as a marina under our township zoning ordinance, which is consistent with the definition of how the property was used previously as well. The reason for this review process to unfold is because we now have the establishment of permanent new docking structures that trigger all of the current zoning ordinance requirements. So recognizing that this exception request was part of that case, there's a meeting and a public hearing with the BZA on January 10th. An initial meeting and public hearing with the Planning Commission for the broader marina use on January 11th. A discussion of this exception request with the Planning Commission on February 8th. And a meeting that was postponed, a meeting at which the decision on this request was postponed on March 14th. We had an issue with potential split vote and some additional information that we've since gotten since that meeting, which I will go over here tonight. But we now have a full board present and is now presumably an opportunity to make a decision on this exception request. So that's why we're meeting tonight. Again, here's a broader view of the site plan that was submitted. There's an overall site plan as well as some detailed information regarding the dock, including a lake bed cross section. There's an overall site schematic that shows some dimensions of the no wake zone that would be implemented around the furthest extent of this dock and its relations of no wake zone that extends across the lake and to the adjacent shore across the lake. Another sheet in this packet includes a drawing that has a lighting detail and a small graphic that shows existing conditions from 2020. So that's important, important delineator because that was the existing conditions prior to some construction that occurred that was unpermitted, that has been addressed through the court and is now being, the issue has been adjourned so that we can review the request for the long-term construction on the site through this process. But this image here is just meant to show you some of the existing conditions prior to all of that in 2020. And there's another graphic that was recently submitted that goes into further detail about that. I mentioned the meeting steps. There's some additional information in your packet since the information that was provided for the March 14th meeting. Because of some of the questions around the Township Belleville Lake Shoreline District ordinance and the fact that it is reviewed as a in a different zoning realm than many of the private sites in the township, there's a distinction that the board had asked to be made between exceptions such as what is being reviewed here as opposed to typical dimensional variance requests. There is a difference. It's rooted in some of the history of the development of the Township Belleville Lake Shoreline District's ordinance. And a memo was provided by the Township's planning consultant dated April 5th, which is in your packet. And that is starting on page, bear with me,
19.
that'd be 19 of your packet. Thank you, Mr. Gerard. Additionally, there was a request for some additional information from the applicant to describe the change in relation to previously existing conditions through to the current proposal in terms of a simple graphic that shows the difference in proposed length of the docks, but also the difference in the setbacks to the side lake lot lines, as well as the overall change in area. And so in your packet, I included a graphic that was submitted by the applicant that should be was at the very end of the packet. And I have a picture of that graphic coming up on an upcoming screen so we can view it in large format. But it may be a helpful graphic to show you the nature of some of those changes. And here's that graphic right here. So in the image on the left, you see the previously existing floating dock structures that were present on the site in 2020. If you look at the envelope of the entire area of those structures, according to the applicant, the total area was measured to be roughly 7,950 square feet of dock space. The current proposal narrows that overall footprint, but also extends it deeper into the lake, of course, which is part of the reason that we're here tonight. The current proposal is for 8,530 square feet. So a slight increase in the overall area, again, narrower and longer. There is a metric here that shows 2023 existing dock area as well. And what that's in reference to is the partially constructed dock. There's a partially constructed dock on the west side that construction began around late 2020. And of course, that was handled through the court and through action by the township to work with the applicant to establish a more formal review process for the long-term dock construction. But that is all to say that since roughly late 2020, there has been a dock structure on the west side of the site. That structure in combination with a floating dock structure on the east side of the site that remains there is roughly 8,120 square feet in total area. So this graphic the graphic shows the previous, the proposed, and the list below shows the previous, the current existing, and the proposed. There are some images as well. One of our board members, Member Haas, assisted with some of these images. Staff took one of the images just to show some perspectives on what is currently present on the site, and we can focus in more closely on any of these. I know the applicant has also provided some images that he has distributed to the board members at the podium tonight. Again, our township planning consultant has provided a memo that explains the difference between a special exception request and a variance request. And I'm glad to read through that in greater detail if the board would like. But the crux of the BZA's decision comes down to findings on these 5 criteria that have been listed in the reports. I strongly recommend that all board members take an opportunity to reference these criteria as they make a decision. My report includes some factors that you might consider with each of these criteria on pages 11 through 13. I won't go through them in great detail, but many of the issues come down to whether the BZA can find that the extension of dock structures at this site will meet these 5 criteria, and you can consider existing context of the site, existing conditions, unique aspects of the site. But of course, reflecting some of the themes of the discussions over the past few months in terms of safety, navigability, and access to the lake by neighboring lake users as well as the broader lake as a whole. But again, there's some detailed factors in your packet. I would just encourage the BZA to go through these findings again. And when it comes time to make a decision, I also encourage that there's, Mr. Chair, if there's a ability to gauge the potential vote. That way there can be a motion in the positive one way or the other, whether it's a vote to approve or deny the request. But to assist with that voting process and to assist with these findings, there is a motion template in the report that was provided near the end. And I'm glad to share that with whoever would like to make the motion tonight. I do recommend that there's a path toward a decision here for the BZA. That's really up to the BZA, but I recommend that if the BZA can find positive findings for all 5 of these criteria, then they should grant the exception. That's what this really comes down to. If the BZA finds positive findings for all 5 of these criteria, they have the ability to make a positive decision. If the consensus is that they do not have positive findings for these 5 criteria from the majority of BZA members, then they can deny the request. But I do encourage you to look through those closely, to consider all the information that's been provided and the changes that have been made in the plans over the course of this project, and make an informed decision based on that. Just a couple of other quick slides and references. I just want to note for our audience tonight, whether attending in person or remotely, our BZA members have received links to all correspondences throughout the life of this case. What I'm hovering over right now is just a link that has been sent to this board numerous times that is an active, it's called a Google Doc. It has an active rolling list of all the feedback, positive, negative, and otherwise that pertains to the case. There's also on our township website, there's what's called a development and planning portal that has additional information about this request for the public. So hopefully the public is aware of the project and has had a chance to review this in great detail. There's some outdated information on this slide, but on the actual website, that's up to date. With that said, I'm glad to answer any questions. I know I didn't go into detail about my findings in this report, but I have in the past, so I'm glad to answer any questions. Otherwise, I will turn it over to the board, and I know that the next item on the packet is for the applicant to make presentation if he so chooses.
Okay, thank you, Director Power. The applicant has presented to the board here some new photos. So if you'd like to present them, Mr. Jones, at the microphone there, so that the people at home can understand what we have received as well.
Okay, Dana.
Oh, yep. Let me get this connected. This. And then you do have to flip it upside down, which is work. I don't know why, but and this will toggle your zoom so you can zoom in and out. It's on the screen.
Thank you. Okay. Is that on? Okay. So thank you for hearing our request. Again, I'm Scott Jones. I reside at 11696 Juniper Drive in Van Buren Township, and I'm here representing the Belleville Yacht Club. So I've been through this multiple times. I'll try to keep it short. I do want to say I came as a representative of BYC. We asked that we don't bring our 300 members here and overwhelm and have a lot of comments. So don't take that as not interested. They are all very supportive of this project and would like to see it to its fruition. One new, I have 2 new documents to share with you. This is a picture that was taken much like what you had in your packet from Dan, but it just shows the lake distance. So the narrowest spot on the lake is the point down here off of Potter, and that is 385 feet of navigable water. Off of our current dock, which is here, the point is currently, that is the 85 feet, 4 inches that we're requesting. So we're currently out with that structure to the distance we're requesting in, or the variance that we're requesting. So that gives us 551 feet of navigable water, so 166 feet more. We did have our engineer, Kevin Hardy, is who did all of our measurements, and he's provided those on the drawings. And another certificate of survey that's been new and provided in the package was discussed. Zoom out here somehow, sorry. These are the 3 dimensions that were discussed previously by Dan. So the 2020 configuration, we call it existing 2020, was 7,950 square feet of coverage of water. And the proposed is 8,530. So there were some questions previously about, us occupying public space. And I just wanted to clearly define how much space the prior docks had and what our current is. The main difference in the configuration, you can see we went to a dogleg dock out 85 feet, 4 inches versus the pre-condition where we're out 56 feet. The precondition, the main concern that the Eagle had was that we encroach on our neighbors' property lines. So you can see we're only 6 feet off the property line to our adjoining neighbor. So any boats coming in or leaving our docks encroach on our neighbor's property. So they were supportive of what I'll call the dogleg or flag dock configuration that allows us 21 feet on each side from our neighboring. So it's the same amount of docks, both can house 16 boats. It's just we're further out into the lake with a narrower footprint versus the old configuration where we're less distance into the water, but encroaching on the property lines. And we believe that's important for us to go to the next step through Eagle, is to have that distance between our docks and our neighbor's property. We have had the current configuration in place since fall of 2020. So we got involved in the court case in early March of 21. So in 2020, we had the 2 sets of existing non-compliant docks. And we then hired a contractor, started the process of changing the west docks in 2020. That was completed in late 20. We were dealing with the township directly in the fall of 20. Then we started dealing with the court in March of 21. And it's what led us here today. So we've roughly had 2.5 years of experience with the docks out that far. We've had no incidences presented, and we will continue to present to the Planning Commission the safety side of it. But really what we're trying to achieve tonight is approval to allow us at 85 feet, 4 inches out into the water. That's really all I have to present. If there's any questions, we've been through it obviously many times. I don't want to have any more of your time than necessary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to each individual member of the panel here, and I'll start off first by saying this is not a public hearing. We've had our public hearing, and we allowed at the second meeting to have additional public comments that were not made at the previous public comments. So I just want to restate that this is not a public hearing. We had a tie vote earlier, and hence we're now in a full board to make the final decision. But the decision is up to this board. I'm going to start off with my comments, and then I'll go down the panel and allow them to speak and how they feel about this and how they would like to vote on this. This is a special exemption. There's a difference between an exemption and a variance. So in order for this to be a variance, they would not be able to get this approved. But under a special exception, there is a different set of circumstances which would allow us to come before this board. If and when the board approves this special exception. It still has to go to the planning commission for site plan approval. Still has to go to the township board of trustees for approval. And then finally, to the state of Michigan for FERC and the EGLE approvals. So with that, I'm going to say up front that this is not a precedent-setting exemption approval or disapproval. Each case will be heard on its individual merits and basis and circumstances. So this is not going to set a precedent for anybody else coming here just to say you let it go over to develop a yacht lot. Therefore, we need it. We can demand it. That's not going to happen. Rest assured, it has to come through the proper channels, just like these. The next, the difference between residential and what developable yacht club is, even though they have neighbors that are residential and a couple of doors down, like a couple of houses down, is the DNR lounge. So lake issues are different than suburban homeowners or regular streets. We're lucky enough to be the only inland lake in Wayne County. Therefore, Buren has the burden of dealing with the issues that arise out of lakefront properties. Years ago, there was properties that were built with small lots or cottages, et cetera, even though they're residential. And all the rules cannot apply to what's on the lake. So we have to offer some way to make it reasonable for property owners to use their property as they would like within their limits. So next, the DNR, not DNR, FERC and EGLE presented the problems to Belleville Yacht Club that they would not allow docking across what is called the property line into the lake. I don't know why they use that, but that is what convinced me to go the way I want to go. Because if I drive on my street, my lot line enters the street. There's a lot line. This for Eagle and FERC, their lot line goes into the lake. So I'm assuming the middle of the lake. And they do not allow entry into encroachments for docking. They have to go in straight in and then park. So that is the reason they have to extend it rather than going sideways. That's one of the problems that FERC demanded of the yacht club to correct and to make the docks longer into the lake rather than sideways. They would have been able to do shorter docks with the same amount of spaces if they were allowed to enter and dock boats sideways coming in. But they have to come straight in from the middle of the lake and then maneuver in without crossing the property line. So that's one of the concerns that they have that is not self-created. The site plan, we're not approving the site plan. The Van Buren Township zone planning and zoning will do all these, including the items such as the materials used on the dock, the lighting, the buoys, which is not been addressed, the civil engineering stamp that needs to be used on the use statement, the lighting, the no-wake zone, traffic study if they desire, the neighbors on the site plan who was next door, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole list of things that the planning commission will have to resolve on their site plan. But we're just approved, if we are approving the special exception to allow this to happen. The rest is up to the various boards and commissions and et cetera, to approve. So with that, I was in favor for it the last time, and I will be voting in the positive this time. And if I may, would you like to start, or you want me to start this time?
No, that's fine. I can go.
Okay,
All right, so, based on the criteria that we have in front of us, number one, enforcement of the provisions request for special exception. Unnecessarily, prevent the reasonable use of the land or boats involved without resulting in benefits of public health. This dock's been out essentially at this depth, or this many feet for 2 years now, right?
2.5.
Over 2 years, 2.5 years. Zero issues, thus far. And based on the evidence of the point and then the usable water, that you would, the area of water that you'd actually be able to use. I'm a boater, I surf in this area quite often. And this area is usually occupied by boats that are being launched. People aren't usually sitting here or using this water for any other reason but to get away from the shore. So I don't believe that would propose any issues as far as the navigable areas. Number two, exception would not unduly prevent the realization of the purposes of this ordinance. I don't believe that. This is a specialty, club, essentially, the only one on the water that we have here in Belleville. So, you have a marina, then you have a restaurant, and then you have, the club. So with that being said, this is one of which would then acquire a exception. So I find yes in on that topic as well. So then you go to 3, special exception would cause substantial harm. We've already kind of talked about that. We talked about what this is actually doing. It's actually removing the harm from the neighboring properties by being able to access the property which the yacht club owns versus using the lake frontage from the neighboring properties. Unusual circumstances and conditions, talked about that already. I do believe this is a unusual circumstance that we have, and going forward, I think that it is a reasonable ask. And then the special exemption is consistent with the goal of providing reasonable, equitable access to all abutting lake owners. I would say that it's consistent with providing reasonable, equitable access to the neighboring properties and everybody else on the lake. And I don't think it hinders the use of the lake or the launch at that time or at the depth that we're currently at. We're proposed at 85.3. With that being said, I would vote like I did last time, and that is to approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Jarrett.
Okay. Like last time. And I read the whole thing last time too. It went on for a long time. I'm gonna not go on for a long time this time. I am gonna have the same opinion that I had last time, given that the facts of the case have not changed. That is that the enforcement of the provisions requested for special exception would unnecessarily prevent reasonable use of the land or boats involved without resulting benefit to public health, safety, welfare of persons and property. Staying with the 60-foot long dock, that's fine. That's how long the docks have always been out there. Enforcing the provision doesn't mean you have to take out the 60-foot long dock. That one's okay. It does not deny use to the yacht club. If we had said no docking whatsoever, well, that would be an unreasonable denial of use, but the ordinance is for 40 feet and that's not unreasonable. Therefore, I don't find that condition to be met. This condition 2 is that the special exception would not unduly prevent the realization of the purpose of the ordinance. The purpose of the ordinance is to enforce community standards, sizes, dimensions that are deemed to be reasonable by folks that brought the ordinance into our zoning laws. The purpose is specifically to limit the amount of dockage, the amount of projection into the lake. Therefore, I find that an exception exceeding the limit that is our community standard is contrary to the purpose of the ordinance, which is to limit distance of projection into the water. So I would say that condition is not met. The special exception, next condition is that the special exception would not cause substantial harm or detriment to adjacent or nearby lands or boats or in the public interest or safety, nor be contrary to the intent and purpose of this ordinance. Again, the intent and purpose of the ordinance is to limit the dock lengths. Therefore, not met. Number 4, unusual circumstances or conditions are involved. I really believe that the intent of this zoning ordinance is that the special circumstances are to do with lot shape, with dimensionality of property. There are standards in the ordinance for measuring, how far out can the dock go, and the measurement is perpendicular to the lake shore. Well, if you have a lot that is not rectilinear, it's not a rectangle, you could have a very oblique lake shore, in which case the measurement of 40 feet perpendicular out from the oblique lake shore could easily go out past the property line projected into the lake. In that case, not granting someone an exception would be removing their equitable access due to a feature of the land. It doesn't have anything to do at this point with what's being done on the land or what's being asked. It's simply a zoning and planning question. Is there a unique aspect to the property that must be addressed in order to grant equitable access? This property is a long, thin rectangle. It's got perpendicular lakefront access. It's not in a shallow area. I don't find that unusual circumstances or conditions are involved with the property, and that condition is not met. Finally, the special exception is consistent with the goal of providing reasonable, equitable access to all abutting lake owners. Again, I believe that the special exception process in this ordinance was drafted such that if there was a parcel of land that would have prevented a standard dock from being put out at 40 feet without running into another dimensional violation, that would be denying someone, a property owner on the lake, the opportunity to have equitable access due to a problem with the property. I don't see this having a problem with the property that needs to be resolved through a special exception. Therefore, I don't believe the condition is met. I do see there's justice in having docks out there. I think the 40-foot long limit is maybe something that could be reconsidered at some point. Certainly, I think 60-foot long docks that were installed, never had a problem with those. They don't seem like they work pretty well. I think it would be beneficial for us to find some way to come to a good resolution, but I'm being asked to weigh in on the letter of the ordinance, and I don't find that all of the conditions have been met. I will say that regardless of what the decision of this board is tonight, this will come to the planning commission at some point. We're going to build a nice dock. I know Mr. Jones is going. I can see the amount of effort he's putting into it. You know, he's really trying on it, and I know that once this is resolved, it will be a great looking facility and an asset to the lakefront owners. Unfortunately, I can't say that all of the conditions have been met for granting exceptions.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Jarr. Commissioner Grissom.
In our last meeting, I was stuck on the word variance. I couldn't get off that. And because I was stuck on variance, I couldn't see the word special exception. And because this is a special exception, and because it was a single dwelling area, and now it's no longer that, but a business, if you will, I see it as being something that we should really look into. And if you look at each of these points here, had I understood the difference between variance and the special exceptions, I think I would have voted yes the last time. But I voted no the last time because I did not understand them. Now that I understand them and I understand what is trying to happen here and how it's going to benefit the community, as well as granting a special exception, not a president saying, but a special exception. If I remember correctly, we were taught with everything that we've been taught over and over and over, that every situation is unique. And because this is unique, and because of my brain power thinking it was a variance, not realizing that it's not just a variance, but it's a special exception in addition. So because of that, I see it as a possible yes. And I would like to change my vote from no to yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Pearson. Mr. Oz, you're next.
I thank you very much. I know that we've spent a lot of time discussing this one issue, and I'm confident that we can come up to a positive conclusion tonight. You know, initially I was hard no when I looked at 120-foot limit out there, but as I gotten more involved in reviewing this case, I do see the need for the current ask of this special exception. And when it starts to number one, enforcement of the position provision requested for the special exception would unnecessarily present the reasonable use of land or boats involved without resulting in the benefit to public health, safety, and welfare of the persons or property, because switching from the previous configuration, which encroached on the two property lines, to the current configuration, you end up with the same number of slots. If we reduce those number of slots and they get more boaters than slots, it's very easily conceived that they're going to have boats that are going to be tying off to one another, extending out into the lake, which is far more unsafe than granting this special exception to 85 feet for the same number of boat slots. The special exception would not unduly prevent the realization or the purpose of this ordinance. And it would not, in my opinion, because we do have this process. Furthermore, this is an exception and not a variance. And if we take a look at page 20 in the McKenna report, it specifically says, granting a special exception does not set a precedence for considering future special exceptions requested, as each request is described on a case-by-case basis. The statement essentially means that each and every case that appears before the BZA seeking an exception must be the criteria A through E, which we're currently discussing, and would the overreaching goal of reaching an equitable conclusion of the allocation use of township lake property for the purpose of the section 3.120A of this ordinance. Therefore, the BZA grants the deviation to one property on the shoreline does not necessarily mean other properties on the shoreline will be granted the same deviation unless they can demonstrate that they have the exact same conditions, exact same zoning, exact same type of residence, and in this case, it would have to be a club, and exact same reasons for the request for this exception. This is in the, the residential, non-single family residential B1B. So it would have to be in that area to begin with, and it would have to be a club, and they would have to be asking for the exception for the exact same reason, if I understand the report from the township consultant on this. So I think that that certainly meets the criteria of number 2. Number 3, the special exception would not cause substantial harm or detriment to the adjacent or nearby lands or boats or public interest or safety, nor convey to the intent or purpose of this ordinance. As you can see from the previous configuration of the docks, previous configuration does encroach on the nearby property lines. The new configuration with the special exception granted does not do that. Furthermore, if you take a look at the pictures that were provided from the applicant, and if you take a look at the pictures that I provided, Dan, did you? So if you take a look at the current dock configuration, which I think is the same picture as what we have in front of us, on the western dock, which is at the requested exception length, looking off to the west, that dock is not going out to the lake any farther than the boathouse that is 6 or 7 lots down. Furthermore, that's from the direction that the boats are going, and the BYC lot, the contour of the shoreline moves in considerably, reducing the amount of the extension that the special exception is asking for, on a property basis or a square footage basis. It's a 7% increase. Dan, could you go ahead and take a look at the previous slide there with the previous configuration? I think it's one more back. Forward. One more. Shows the lot line. One more. That one right there. So if you take a look at the picture on the right-hand side, again, you'll see that the current configuration, if we didn't do anything, you can see how that does encroach on the property that's adjacent to the BYC. So I believe that certainly meets criteria number 3. Criteria number 4, unusual or conditions that are involved. This is not just because of the land. This does not specifically say because of the land. I think it's because of the fact that we have a narrow lot that's only 130 feet wide. And you have a club that has well over 300 members. Is that correct?
We're currently at 300.
With a number of those members either living on the lake or owning boats that would be using the property. So I believe that is a circumstance that is unusual for this property where it's actually zoned. And the special exception is consistent with the goals for providing reasonable, equitable access to abutting lake owners, which actually this exception improves that by reducing or changing the configuration that no longer encroaches on the following adjacent land. So my vote continues to be a yes in favor of this special exception. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Commissioner Haas. Trustee Martin.
Sure.
Yes.
You know, this lake ordinance was put together by a group of residents that lived on various areas of the lake. And they met extensively and they worked, they did a lot of work on this lake ordinance. And the lake ordinance was put in effect, this particular ordinance with the 40-foot dock length before, because of safety issues and that it was a reasonable length for these docks. So it was 17 members of our community that worked on this lake ordinance committee. So my findings are, and you know, one other thing, that's why we have ordinances, that's why when we build structures, we give permits, we go through all the red tape, or if you want to call it that, to do it so that it's done properly and by the rules and by the standards that we have set. That being said, my findings is that I would not approve this because of item number 1. It does not prevent, denying this does not prevent the reasonable use of the property. They have been using this property in this current configuration for some time now, and I think they will continue to use it in the future. So I don't think they meet the criteria in item number 1. So the other items is I mean, it's a moot point. It's one of the items, they don't meet all the 5 criteria, so I can't approve it based on that. I'm not gonna go into a long dissertation, you know, but it looks like it appears they already have the votes for it, so.
Thank you, trustee Martin. Commissioner LaRock.
Thank you. I won't bury the lead or belabor the point as well. I'm a no. I agree that, the 40-foot dock length was set up to serve the purpose of the lake for everybody involved. I don't see any really special circumstance here. For me, I don't find that current encroachments for other construction that may or may not have been permitted supports or justifies an exception. I don't find that all 5 of the findings are, in support of justifying the exception as well. So again, I'm a no. I'll leave it at that. That's what we're kind of done here. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussion with anybody on the zoning board? If not, a motion is in order.
I'd like to make a motion to the chair.
Yes, Mr. Honest.
Case number 22-056. I would like to make a motion to approve the request for the exception modification or approval by the Belleville Yacht Club to install 2 dock structures for each with a length not to exceed 85.3 feet, subject to the approval by the state of Michigan, in contrast to the requirements of section 3.120D5 of the Van Buren Township ordinance, which limits the dock length to 40 feet into Belleville Lake, measured perpendicularly from the shoreline unless a greater length is necessary to reach the water with a depth of 3 feet. The subject site is Township Lake property adjacent to 831 East Huron River Drive, parcel ID 83-088-99-0005000. On the north side of East Huron River Drive between Loza Lane and Evelyn Court. This site is zoned Belleville Lake Shoreline District B, non-single family residential BLB. The motion is based on the findings and fact derived by section 3.120F7 of the Van Buren Township ordinance, finding for the affirmative in favor of the exception requested. Oh, excuse me, I shouldn't do that. Township ordinance. Okay. Forgot there was a parenthetical. Number 1, the enforcement of the provision requested for the special exception would unnecessarily prevent the reasonable use of the land or boats involved without resulting benefit to the public health, safety, and welfare of persons and property. Because of the points that I made earlier, and I don't think I need to belabor that. No, okay. The special exception would not unduly prevent the realization of the purpose of this ordinance. The special exception would not cause substantial harm to the detriment to adjacent or nearby lands or boats or public interest or safety, nor contrary to the intent or their purpose of this ordinance. 4 unusual circumstances or conditions are involved. And number 5, the special exception is consistent with the goals of providing reasonable, equitable access to abutting lake owners.
Is there support for the motion?
I will support.
What about Mr. Sellers? Any discussion by any members of the board? Seeing none, a roll call vote, please.
John Buren,
Yes.
Amos Crisette,
Yes.
trustee Kevin Martin,
No.
John Haas,
Yes.
Aaron Sellers,
Yes.
Jeffrey Jar,
No.
Charles LaRock.
No.
4 yeses and 3 nos.
And the motion passes 4-3. Thank you, everybody. It's on to the planning commission to finish this down.
It's got a long road to go with some other regulatory bodies too, sir.
Yes, sir.
But absolutely, looking forward to it.
We have no other new business. So I have a couple announcements. It's mainly for our panel here. Michigan State is offering an extension of the BZA online certificate program, which is a certified leadership program, and it's done virtually. So you can go online, do it at your own leisure, and get 6 credits for your master's in zoning and planning. So I recommend everybody look at this. I believe Dan said he'll send out an email to the rest of the panel here, but it came out today, and the price is reasonable, and you can do it at your leisure, so it's real good, and I encourage everybody to do it, and you can do it at your own time. Okay?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I did Citizen Planner online, and online is a good way to.
Yes,
I
it is.
really thought it was good.
Yep.
So some people have traveled to go sit in the room.
Yeah, we used to do that that way.
The planning
But
commission.
we're looking at somebody
The
there.
chairman is there laughing because he did a citizen planner in person. I think he would have been just as happy to do it on.
Yes. Okay, all right, Dan, do we have anything coming up for the, June meeting? I'm sorry.
It has been a busy first half of the year. I don't believe we have an agenda for the June meeting, but I'll let you know as soon as I know. If we
Okay.
do.
Yes, Amos.
In the past, and we've had, a phone call, letter or something sent to each of the board members as to whether you want to be on board next year or whatever. Maybe I'm the one that was left out, but I didn't get a call or anything.
Does the term expire?
Hope not.
I don't know if that's the case or not, but
Usually, my experience has been that you don't get a request until you're ready to expire.
oh, okay, all right. So
Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. But I can loop in more with the supervisor's office. They will tend to have a process for advance notice if your term is expiring, and they give you an option to continue or opt out. But if you want more regular communication about your role in the BZA, I can certainly touch base more often than that, because everybody does have 3-year terms.
because I at one time, I know I got one every year, so that's, I'm like, okay.
I didn't follow up on that.
Anyone else have any concerns, comments? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order. Wait a minute, you just want to stay here?
It seems so short.
No.
And we are adjourned.
Some more.
Motion by President and support by Mr. Jar. All in favor, say aye. Opposed likewise, the motion carried. We're adjourned at 7:59.
No. Yeah. Ordinance bills. It reminds me. So it's good to just.